You think the Strait of Hormuz is some distant strip of water on a map, somebody else's problem, a headline for traders and generals. But it isn't. It is a pressure point with your name on it, and if it snaps, your comfort goes first. You think danger announces itself with explosions and sirens, but the real danger usually arrives as a delayed payment, a higher fuel bill, a more expensive shipment, a market that suddenly remembers how fragile your normal life really is. Subscribe if you want more reminders like this, not because a channel needs your click, but because you need truth in your ear when the world keeps handing you distraction. You need a place that says what most people are too soft, too lazy, or too scared to say out loud. Here's what it really means. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most dangerous waterway right now because it is not just a route. It is a choke point, a narrow gate through which an absurd amount of global energy still moves: oil, gas, tankers, nerves, ego, threats, calculations, miscalculations. It is a place where one missile, one drone, one seizure, one bad decision, one desperate regime, one overconfident commander, or one frightened captain can make the entire world pay. That is the thesis. Not maybe, not eventually. Now. And you need to understand that because most people still think danger is about size. Bigger country, bigger economy, bigger military, safer system. No. Wrong. Systems do not break only because something is large. Systems break because something is narrow, because something is concentrated, because too much depends on too little. That's called fragility. That's called overexposure. That's called building your life on a bridge you never bothered to inspect. The misconception is simple. People look at the globe and think, there are oceans everywhere, ships can just go around, markets will adapt, adults are in charge, someone has a plan. That is the bedtime story. That is the fantasy version of geopolitics. The hard truth is uglier. There are still a few places on Earth where geography humiliates power, places where geography looks at modern technology, trillion-dollar economies, great power speeches, naval posturing, sanctions, alliances, and says, none of that changes the map. Hormuz is one of those places. Narrow water, massive consequence. You don't get to negotiate with geography. You don't get to motivate a tanker through a blocked lane. You don't get to positive think your way past mines, drones, anti-ship missiles, harassment, seizures, cyber disruption, insurance spikes, or panic in the futures market. Reality does not care how confidently a spokesperson says the situation is under control. Reality cares about throughput, risk, distance, timing, exposure, capacity. That's it. And this is where weak thinking always fails. Weak thinking says, if the world knows it matters, nobody will dare touch it. Strong thinking says, precisely because the world knows it matters, every player around it understands its leverage. That changes everything. When a narrow point controls an outsized share of energy flow, it becomes more than a waterway. It becomes a weapon, a signal, a bargaining chip, a threat without even needing to be fully used. Sometimes you don't need to shut the artery completely. Sometimes all you need to do is squeeze hard enough to remind the body who can make it faint. That is why this matters even when the strait is technically open. Listen carefully. Danger is not only closure. Danger is uncertainty. Danger is delay. Danger is the cost of fear. Danger is insurers pricing in risk. Danger is shipping companies rerouting. Danger is naval escorts. Danger is crews hesitating. Danger is traders bidding up energy because they know the margin for error is pathetic. You think a route is safe because ships are still moving. But if every ship is moving under threat, the system is already bleeding. And why does it happen? Root cause. Always go to root cause. Not slogans, not emotional theater. Root cause. The Strait of Hormuz sits beside one of the most politically loaded, militarily tense, economically essential regions on Earth. You have Iran on one side, Gulf producers on the other, outside powers hovering in the background, armed groups and proxy networks in the wider ecosystem, sanctions pressure, strategic messaging, domestic political incentives, religious tension, prestige contests, deterrence games, and the old human disease of believing you can control escalation once you start playing with it. That's the root. Too much value in too little space, surrounded by actors who all have reasons to posture and some who have reasons to disrupt. And disruption doesn't always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from weakness. That's the part civilians never understand until it's too late. A cornered actor can be more dangerous than a dominant one. A regime under pressure, a faction seeking relevance, a proxy proving loyalty, a state trying to restore deterrence after humiliation, a commander trying not to look weak, a government trying to manufacture leverage at the negotiation table. These are not stable ingredients. These are accelerants. You put them around a global energy choke point and then act surprised when markets twitch? That's not analysis. That's denial. You also need to stop imagining danger as a single clean event. Real breakdown is usually layered. First comes rhetoric, then warnings, then harassment, then a seizure, a strike, a retaliation, an escort, a swarm, a near miss, a scramble, a condemnation, a press conference, a reassurance, a rumor, an insurance revision, a jump in freight rates, a jump in oil, a jump in fear. People wait for the giant cinematic moment, but the truth is, systems are often wounded in increments. That's called escalation creep. That's called boiling the pot slowly enough for comfortable people to keep saying, it's probably fine. It is not fine. Because what does it cost? It costs more than the headline. It costs more than the crude price. It costs confidence. That word matters. Confidence. The modern economy runs on confidence almost as much as it runs on fuel. Businesses place orders because they assume inputs will arrive. Airlines set schedules because they assume fuel availability. Manufacturers promise delivery because they assume shipping lanes will function. Consumers spend because they assume tomorrow will look enough like today. Start threatening a choke point like Hormuz, and you do not just threaten barrels. You threaten assumptions. And when assumptions crack, everything becomes more expensive. You pay at the pump. You pay in heating. You pay in groceries because transportation is baked into everything. You pay in inflation persistence. You pay in market volatility. You pay in interest rate uncertainty. You pay in weaker currencies for importers. You pay in political instability as governments scramble to explain why life got harder again. You pay in the cheap, quiet ways first. That's what makes it dangerous. A missile can hit a ship. Fine. That's visible. But fear can hit millions of households. That's the real radius. And if you think energy transitions magically erase that, you are living in a slogan, not in a system. The world has diversified some things. Yes, it has built resilience in some places. Yes. But the machine still runs on hydrocarbons at scale, and choke points still matter because time matters. Replacement matters. Routing matters. Spare capacity matters. LNG matters. Asian import dependence matters. European nervousness matters. Refinery compatibility matters. Shipping fleet availability matters. You don't just replace strategic flow with inspirational language. You replace it with infrastructure, inventory, contracts, diversification, and time. And time is the one thing a crisis never gives you enough of. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is dangerous right now. Not in theory, not in a textbook, but right now. Because the global system is already strained by overlapping conflicts, great power rivalry, supply chain sensitivity, debt, inflation scars, political polarization, and the collective exhaustion of populations that still want to believe stability is their birthright. It isn't. Stability is maintained. Stability is defended. Stability is paid for. Stability is a disciplined achievement, not a default setting. Forget that. And a narrow waterway on the other side of the world starts teaching you economics through pain. And there's another layer most people miss. Hormuz is psychologically dangerous because it exposes how dependent modern civilization still is on invisible corridors. That bothers people. It offends their ego. They want to feel sovereign in their personal life, while being structurally dependent on systems they do not understand. They want convenience without vulnerability. They want abundance without choke points. They want luxury without exposure. That is fantasy. Your phone, your food, your fuel, your standard of living, your investments, your salary, your weekend, all of it sits downstream from routes, ports, grids, pipelines, tankers, contracts, navies, and men making decisions under pressure. Ignore that if you want. Reality will not ignore you back. So reframe it. Stop thinking of the Strait of Hormuz as news. Start thinking of it as a mirror. It reveals a law of life most people spend years trying to avoid. Wherever your survival depends on a narrow point you do not control, you are not as secure as you think. That's true for empires. It's true for economies. It's true for companies. And yes, it's true for you. If your entire mood depends on one text, one person, one client, one paycheck, one platform, one boss, one supply line, one story you tell yourself, then you have built your life like the world built around Hormuz. Narrow, exposed, vulnerable to interruption, one disruption away from panic. And when panic hits, you discover what you really are, not who you posted, not who you imagined, what you built. That's why this topic matters beyond geopolitics. It is not just about ships and oil. It is about choke points, dependency, leverage, preparedness, composure under threat. The people who understand this do not merely become more informed. They become harder to manipulate, because once you see how the world actually works, you stop worshiping appearances, you stop confusing size with strength, you stop confusing noise with control, you stop confusing temporary calm with durable security. And that brings us to the archetype. The man who understands this is not the loudest man in the room. He is not doom-scrolling for adrenaline. He is not performing intelligence with dramatic opinions and zero discipline. He is not addicted to panic. He is not seduced by headlines. He is grounded. He is awake. He respects reality enough to prepare for it. He knows a choke point when he sees one. He does not build his peace on a single fragile dependency. He widens margins. He creates options. He stores energy, financially and psychologically. He watches what matters. He ignores theater. He is hard to rattle because he has trained himself to look past surface noise and identify structure. Everyone else is asking, is this trending? He is asking, what does this control? What depends on it? Who can threaten it? Who benefits from panic? What is the second-order effect? That is a different caliber of mind. That is not paranoia. That is pattern recognition. That's called maturity. And it shows in his life. He does not overconsume. He does not over-leverage. He does not assume easy days are guaranteed. He does not mock preparation because he is too insecure to admit vulnerability. He does not wait for a crisis to discover he should have paid attention. He respects the supply chain. He respects cash flow. He respects energy. He respects logistics. He respects weak points. He respects the price of complacency because he has paid enough small prices in life to know he never wants the massive one. He also has boundaries. Strong boundaries. He understands that what is true for nations is true for people. If you let everything bottleneck through one unstable channel, you invite control. If your peace depends on approval, that's a choke point. If your income depends on one source, that's a choke point. If your confidence depends on comfort, that's a choke point. If your direction depends on the crowd, that's a choke point. He sees it, he names it, he fixes it, quietly, repeatedly, without applause. That's the difference between grounded strength and decorative strength. Decorative strength is talk. Grounded strength is redundancy. Decorative strength is image. Grounded strength is preparation. Decorative strength is confidence when conditions are easy. Grounded strength is composure when the lane narrows and everyone else starts lying to themselves. So let's strip the fantasy away. What makes the Strait of Hormuz the world's most dangerous waterway right now is not merely that conflict can happen there. Conflict happens in many places. It's that the world remains deeply exposed to what happens there. And exposure plus tension equals leverage. Leverage plus miscalculation equals shock. Shock plus denial equals damage. That is the latter. Simple, brutal, real. You think markets are rational. They are rational until they are afraid. You think governments are strategic. They are strategic until domestic pressure, ego, or fear short-circuits judgment. You think militaries communicate clearly. Sometimes they do. Sometimes radar blips, swarms, bad timing, and human pride create a chain nobody intended. You think commerce is neutral. It is neutral until it sails through contested water under the shadow of states proving points to each other. And understand this too, the danger is amplified by the fact that everybody involved thinks they are managing risk. That is always the prelude. Every side says it seeks deterrence. Every side says it does not want wider war. Every side says it is acting defensively. And maybe each one even believes it. But history is not written by intentions alone. It is written by interaction, move and counter-move, signal and interpretation, threat and pride. That is why narrow arenas are so dangerous. There is less room for error and even less room for ego. When people say, surely nobody would risk shutting down something so important, hear the weakness in that sentence. Hear the dependence. Hear the prayer disguised as analysis. Surely is not a strategy. Surely is what unprepared people say when they need the world to behave. The world does not care what you need. The world rewards realism. So what do you do with this? You do not become hysterical. Hysteria is just helplessness with volume. You become clear. You stop outsourcing your sense of reality to the comfort level of the crowd. You pay attention to strategic choke points because they tell you where systems are honest. When everything is smooth, everybody acts smart. When a choke point tightens, truth comes out. Who planned? Who improvised? Who diversified? Who overpromised? Who lied? Who depended on luck? You should use this as a lesson in personal command. Study the pattern. Internalize it, because the same architecture repeats everywhere. In business, the company that depends on one supplier learns the Hormuz lesson. In relationships, the man who depends on one person for identity learns the Hormuz lesson. In finance, the household that depends on perfect conditions learns the Hormuz lesson. In health, the person who ignores small warnings until the system fails learns the Hormuz lesson. Narrow dependency is hidden weakness. That's the rule. And yes, there is a moral component here. Self-respect is not only how you speak, it is how you prepare. It is how honestly you assess your vulnerabilities. It is how quickly you stop pretending that dependence is freedom. There is nothing masculine about delusion. There is nothing strong about being shocked by predictable consequences. There is nothing noble about refusing to see what you rely on. Real self-respect means you tell yourself the truth early, before life has to scream it at you. That is why you need a tougher internal voice. Not cruel, clear, not theatrical, precise. The voice that says, "You are more exposed than you think. Tighten up." The voice that says, "Comfort made you sloppy." The voice that says, "You don't need panic. You need structure." The voice that says, "If one disruption can break your stability, then your stability was never real." That's not negativity, that's calibration. Now make it practical. Do this. Stop consuming geopolitical news like entertainment. Start asking one question: what does this disrupt downstream? Do this. Stop reacting only to explosions. Start tracking bottlenecks, shipping, energy, insurance, and supply chains. Do this. Stop assuming someone bigger will solve it. Start building margins in your own life, cash reserves, lower dependence, Broader skill set, multiple options. Do this. Stop worshiping convenience. Start respecting resilience. Do this. Stop saying, I'll deal with it if it happens. Start reducing the number of things that can break you. You stop building your life around one fragile source. You stop telling yourself dependence is efficiency. You stop mistaking smooth days for strong foundations. You stop mocking preparedness because you don't want to feel uncool. You stop waiting for certainty before taking responsibility. You stop living like continuity is guaranteed. Then you redirect. You redirect your attention toward structure. You redirect your money toward margin. You redirect your habits toward discipline. You redirect your identity away from passive consumer and toward responsible operator. You redirect your mind away from fantasy and toward consequence. You redirect your conversations too. Less gossip, more mechanics, less outrage, more understanding, less performance, more preparation. And if you want the tight sequence, here it is. See the choke point, name the dependency, measure the exposure, reduce the reliance, build the alternative, repeat. See the choke point, name the dependency, measure the exposure, reduce the reliance, build the alternative, repeat. That formula will serve you in geopolitics, money, work, health, and relationships because reality loves patterns. You may not control Hormuz. You do control whether you learn from it. You control whether you keep living as if the world owes you uninterrupted access to comfort. You control whether you keep laughing off risk until risk collects its debt. You control whether you build a life so narrow that every external tremor becomes an internal collapse. And that is where this stops being a foreign policy lesson and becomes a character test. Because character is revealed when you can no longer pretend systems are stable by default. Character is revealed when you realize your peace was rented, not owned. Character is revealed when you stop asking, how do I feel about this? And start asking, what does this demand of me? That's the grown question. That's the operator's question. That's the question of someone who intends to remain standing while others are bargaining with reality after ignoring it for years. And don't miss the final irony. The Strait of Hormuz is dangerous because it is narrow, but many people become dangerous to themselves for the same reason. Their thinking is narrow, their planning is narrow, their identity is narrow, their options are narrow. Then life squeezes and they call it bad luck. No, sometimes it's bad architecture. Sometimes the crisis didn't create your weakness. It revealed it. That should sober you up. It should also free you. Because once you see that, you stop waiting for the world to become less dangerous and you start becoming less fragile. That is power. Quiet power, durable power. Not the fantasy of controlling everything, but the discipline of not being shattered by what you cannot control. So yes, the Strait of Hormuz is the world's most dangerous waterway right now because too much of the world still passes through too little space under too much tension. Because the costs of disruption are global, while the trigger can be local. Because modern life is more interconnected than people admit and less resilient than they assume. Because leverage lives where dependence concentrates. Because in a tired, tense, overextended world, the narrow places matter most. But the deeper lesson is yours. Look at the choke points in your own life. Where are you one interruption away from fear? Where have you confused convenience with security? Where are you still praying the lane stays open instead of building another route? Ask it honestly. Answer it brutally. Then act. Become the person who is hard to corner because you refuse to remain narrow. Become the man who does not need crisis to become serious. Become the one who sees reality before reality starts charging interest. Be grounded, be disciplined, be difficult to destabilize, not because you are numb, because you are prepared, not because you are paranoid, because you are awake. This is how you reclaim your life from illusion, not by hiding from hard truths, but by using them. Not by resenting reality, but by respecting it. Not by collapsing under pressure, but by letting pressure reveal where you need to reinforce. That is growth without self-deception. That is strength without performance. That is self-respect in action. And that is why this matters. Not just for the world, for you. You are not here to be a spectator to systems you don't understand. You are not here to drift from comfort to comfort until one broken corridor breaks your spirit. You are not here to live at the mercy of narrow dependencies and call that freedom. You are here to wake up, to widen your base, to tighten your standards, to build a mind that sees leverage, a life that has margin, and a spine that does not beg reality to be easier. You are the answer, not because you can stop every crisis, but because you can stop being careless, passive, and structurally weak. You can stop handing your peace to fragile systems without backup. You can stop pretending not to know what matters. You can become someone who meets a volatile world with discipline instead of denial. So remember the lesson. The narrow places rule the game. In trade, in war, in money, in identity. Protect your weak points before they become your masters. And subscribe if you want more of this kind of truth, more clarity when the noise gets thick, more reminders that comfort is not strategy and slogans are not strength. Stay close if you want a voice that pulls you back to reality and pushes you toward self-command. You belong here if you are done with fantasy, done with excuses, and ready to build a life that can hold under pressure.